Hello, and thank you again for joining me on another episode of What Sayeth the Crooked Nose. Today I'm going to be talking to, I always talk to somebody special, right? But John, right? John Farrell. This guy I met because he's part of my, Peter Sage, Elite Mentorship Forum alumni group. But more than that, we started, or rather, he started, and I joined a small group called the Quantum Alignment Foundation, and it's to go through and just talk to people, see where we are aligning ourselves with our higher purpose, with our sense of spirituality, what's working, maybe share some thoughts on what's not working, and just collaborate amongst a group of peers that resonate at a higher level in order to help us, right, resonate at that high level. Or the idea that our environment is what shapes us. Our environment is what programs us. I mean, even our cells have a membrane around them so that they can see or feel what is around them, what is the environment around them, so they can respond accordingly, so they can be programmed. And so we aren't, we don't get to choose whether we're programmable, right? We're programmable by design. That's just the way it is. Look at, if we weren't, then propaganda wouldn't work. If we weren't programmable by design, then people wouldn't believe so, vociferously, the beliefs that they do. And whether they be things that try to bring world peace, or things that try to bring about war. And so I think to have that, foundation of who am I, right? Who am I, and how do I align with who I am with other people who resonate, high? So that way, if they, help me understand, my path, and, like John, right? He's been doing this for like 20 years, right? This guy's, been around for a while. And to help me, if I'm falling low, well, to help me raise myself up, right? Because the environment I want to be programmed by is an environment that actually helps me to be better, and not an environment where, right, I'm now, bringing myself down to meet the standards of people who can't lift themselves up. I'd rather be around people who want to lift themselves up and then be at a higher and higher place. And I think that you'll probably find that John and I are going to have a pretty fun conversation. And I think that you'll see exactly that. This is a guy who resonates very highly. He's looking to, serve the best of his ability. And, if you like what you hear, you go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, right? Let me know what was it that you liked, and maybe we lost you somewhere. Hey, if we lost you, let us know. Hey, if we did a flyby right over your head because you're not wearing an outrageously awesome hat that would catch, any sort of flyby, let us know. Let us know where we did a flyby, so we can go ahead and suss that out. Thanks so much for your time, and enjoy. And John, thank you so much for joining me. I'm quite excited about this conversation. I shared, in my, monologue at the beginning, a little bit about not just that we are, affiliated through EMF, but also the Quantum Alignment Foundation, and really what that group serves, and, how it helps me. And, I'm wondering if you could just start off telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe how you got started in, whether it be spirituality or self-help, and let's just kind of see where it goes from there.
Hey, I'm really excited to be here as well. I've watched a few of your podcasts, and they're really interesting. You have this ability to bring this out on people, the people that you're interviewing. So it'd be interesting to see where this one goes. So my story, yeah, I suppose it starts. Well, I just started a book actually. That's a different starting. That was starting in
Oh,
the middle of a civil war. But this story starts. My wife, we'd worked overseas for years in the marine industry, and we came back to England. We were staying in London, and my wife said, "Oh, we're going to go along to this thing at Docklands." So she dragged me along there, and it was okay, and there was all this dancing and lights and loud music, and then and she's sitting on the outside. I'm sitting on the inside of the chairs we're sitting at. And the big guy on the stage there, I guess, "Hey, we did do a little bit of meditation." I hadn't done meditation before, but yeah, I'm going for. I guess we're going to turn the lights down, we'll turn the music down, we'll do a little bit of meditation, and then when we're in the right state, we'll go out and do a firewalk. I knew then why she was sitting on the outside of me. I was off,
so you
but
can
she
run
stopped
away?
me. So, yeah, but she knew this, so she stopped me. Um, yeah, that was pretty much the start of it. I realized many years later, having built delivered firewalks that you can't be complacent about this stuff.
Mm.
You got to be involved, but you got to be involved 100%. You know, on a firewalk, other things that you can do that are potentially quite dangerous, you can't do them 95%.
Mm.
You know, or that's when accidents happen. So yeah, I think the longest one we did was 400 meters.
So I've heard with
2000
firewalks, and I'd love to hear your opinion because I've never done a firewalk myself, but I've heard that part of why you need to just be in that zone is because you don't want to walk too slow and you don't want to run. Because if you run, you're digging your feet in, and then you're really getting in those hot coals, and you're going to be a lot worse for wear. But if you're in that zone and you're just walking at that brisk pace, well, you're just kind of lithely going across and just being coated, right? The ash and that's coating the hot embers. Can you talk a little bit about that? And is there a way that you take that in the zone in your own business and in your own life?
The first thought that comes up with me is Joe Dispenza. You know, where your focus goes, your energy goes.
Mm.
If you go too fast, if you go too slow, you're thinking about the fact that you come out of the zone. You start thinking about that because things start to happen. You get distracted, and that's when you get burned.
Mm.
And I've done firewalks where there's been the sort of the coals are sort of black on the top, so you could argue that they're only sort of 800 degrees instead of 900 degrees. And I've done them where the flames have been sort of like 5 or 6 inches.
Yeah.
But the point about firewalking or walking on broken glass or jumping off the top of telegraph poles, jumping out of skydiving out of aircraft, it's not the action, it's the life is about experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the power, the strength in that is being able to tap into that experience, that emotion that comes up then. And then if I'm on a sports field or if I'm going on stage to speak in front of 200 people, I tap into that energy, that experience, and I take that physiology with me into that key moment that I need to be in control. Because, instant it happens, emotions and logic can't exist in the same place at the same time. And if you don't have mastery, control over your emotions, then they're going to swamp out the logic. And you're not going to be able to process through what should I do now? And you're going to behave. So, one of the sageisms we have from Peter Sage is, the person is not their behavior. It's not his, but he's the one that said it to me most recently. The person is not their behavior, but the majority of us don't have that emotional control. So when we need our logic, I'm getting into this situation and I shouldn't be behaving like this. Our emotion takes over and we behave like that. We get ourselves into trouble. So in a situation, I'm walking on hot coals, as I just said a few minutes ago. I think the short one I did in Docklands was about 12 feet. Not too long, but still it's hot coals.
Bro,
we didn't Hawaii again. We didn't Hawaii. The last time I did a long one in Hawaii was about 800 meters.
Oh my God.
It was one of the longer ones. And so it wasn't any problem at all. And there was so many of us doing it there. My wife did it as well. And because they were so long, they were sending us down. So someone would be halfway through, you're 400 meters down, the other person would start. And she's in the zone, and the guy in front of her yelped and jumped off. But she had the power to come out of the zone, put herself back into it. And she finished it. That's above emotional control. That's come out and then be able to go back into the logic of what she was doing.
So is it logic? So that's such I love where this is going, because I've been trying to figure out and suss out, right? There's this idea in the Tao Te Ching that thoughts weaken the mind. And the best thing that I can relate that to is this idea that if I'm in flow with my emotions. I'm not in flow with my thoughts. My thoughts are responding to what's there, but not in a way in which I'm sub-vocalizing. It's just informing, and I know how to respond. So it is, while the logic can get you to a place where you can get your emotions in control, is there a level that even supersedes that, where you can just get to such a strong emotional state that when you come back into your head, you're like, oh, I need to go back to this emotion of because logic, it doesn't really stand to logic to say, hey, I'm 100% certain I'm going to be fine. Because logic's gonna be like, well, what about that dragon over there? Or what about these hot coals? Or what about, what
Yeah.
does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I think I'm just using the word logic there to compare it to emotions.
Mm-hmm.
When our emotions take over, we react. We go into this unconscious reptilian, reticulated activating system kicks in, and we're automatic. And if you can play sport at that level, you're not going to lose. You don't have that sense of losing. We're going to win this game. I'm from New Zealand. I followed the All Blacks, one of the greatest sports teams in the world in the early 2000s. They won pretty much every match that they played for 10 years, and they beat they outbeat Manchester United, the top football teams, top NBA teams, as the winningest team over that 10-year period. And they would go, and I remember them years ago. A couple of years ago, they played Ireland, and they were 3 points behind. Sorry, they were 6 points behind at full time. But the game doesn't stop until there's a penalty or there's stop and play. And they played 21 moves, which is most games you might get 8 moves in. They played 21 moves and they scored. And it was even. It was 22-all. So for that it was 4 minutes of continuous play that they had to score and not make a mistake at international level. And they did it. And they did this time and time again over the years, right down to the final whistle, the final seconds of the game, they were still winning. There was never that belief that, maybe, and as soon as that change of focus comes in, as Joe Dispenza says, the energy goes where the focus goes. 100% focused, that's where the energy is. Had the emotion come up? Yeah, with rugby, you're running, you're passing, you're tackling. There's lots of different skills going on. So many opportunities for a penalty to stop the game, finish the game for them. So be able to control your emotions at that level in sports. Sports are quite exciting. I find them quite exciting because you've got a set amount of time to win. In life, it's spread over life. In business, if I'm going to go on stage, I need to be in that state. So I've spoken a lot on stage, and I think for me, went through that period of being worried, scared about going on stage, and then actually getting a bit more comfortable with it, to the point where, and some of this came from observing Tony Robbins. You're actually moving the speech, changing the speech to suit the audience. So you're in your fullness on stage, you're in control on stage, but you're also watching what the audience does, changing the way that you deliver.
Sure. You're there to serve the people who are there to get value from you.
Yeah, but it's a step up. It's not just the process of doing a talk. It's the process. The talk's almost here. So the talk's being delivered here, and I'm watching the talk. Should we move it this way? Should I stop? Should I pull back? At that level, so the logic that there's a thinking process and going on beside the speaking process that's going on. Any little bit of emotion that comes up, that all goes out the door, because the logic there, the thought processes, you struggle to get them through. So being able to control your emotions, and in a sport and in life, there'll be times when your emotions do get over the top. And in sports, if it's an aggressive, it's confrontational sport, you want to use the energy of emotions, but you also want to have that come back and take control again. Go back into the logic mode so you can think through the process. Now, I wouldn't say that logic in sport or in life is coming out of flow. I think flow is just when you're allowing the unconscious, the unconscious just to go with what's happening. A leader or seek first to understand and then be understood is the business speak for this, where you're looking to see what happens, to find out what everyone's opinion are without influencing what's happening. So you're really trying to understand the other side of the argument. It's an interesting dichotomy, that non-dualism. So we always, now society today puts us in this dualistic thinking. But to be able to think like a leader, you're respecting and listening, actively listening to the other people in the group, in the business meeting. So you're thinking from a non-dual perspective. You have to come from a non-dual perspective to actually seek to understand them, not just listen to what they're saying. And you've got to be able to recognize when you get triggered. So an event happens, we're either informed by it or we're triggered. If you're triggered, that's a gateway for your emotion to come up. So you've got to recognize that and be able to say, no, that needs to be put aside, because that's not, this isn't the right place for it.
You can't have a rational conversation with an emotional reaction. It's just not possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. And so when you're on stage and you are examining, how the crowd is responding, is that more of an intuitive feel, or are you in your head, okay, John, they kind of responded this way, and so now I'm going to go ahead and cue? Or is it almost like nonverbal cues, like you see in British football, American soccer, right? They'll throw a yellow card and everyone knows, okay, well, there's penalty, right? They didn't have to say penalty, right? They didn't have to vocalize. They just did the sign to let people know, okay, something happened. Is it like that?
I'll tell you a little bit about my story to give you the answer there. I did, so I was with Tony Robbins over 9/11 in Hawaii, which was an incredible place to be. So I did mastery.
Were you there with Peter Sage? Because Peter.
Yes, yeah, Peter was there. Yeah.
What? Yeah, he shared that story. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, keep going.
So, in Tony Robbins, basically, it's NLP, neuro linguistic programming, which is really powerful. And I still use it today, but I also recognize that it's manipulative. By changing my languaging, I can influence the other person. So I did my master's in NLP, but I also looked around and we ran into this guy, and he actually came to live with my colleague in Somerset and Glastonbury. And he was doing the opposite. He was asking himself, so abuse victims can quite often tell you about the abuse. There's no emotional connection to it. The rest of their life screwed up because they can't have relationships. So it's the behaviors showing up in other parts of their life, but they can tell you about the abuse. So they're not dealing with the emotions. Vets coming back from conflict with PTSD, they can't tell you about the incident because it's blanked out. Autistic people struggle with their emotions, their own emotions, and how to deal with other people's emotions. So he worked a lot with these different groups to how can he help them. You don't want to take them back to the abuse. You don't want to re-traumatize them. The unconscious is fighting. It's blocked the emotions. It's blocked the image out altogether. So the unconscious has set up something there to protect itself, protect the form, the body, the human. So his work was going behind that. So working with the unconscious. Now the unconscious works in metaphor and symbolism. So most of and I did a lot of work with him over the years. We were on developing that. He developed that in the 90s, the early 2000s. He worked with us in Somerset in the late 2000s, and we went on to develop another level of therapy, which I sort of pulled back from, because the therapy that we would do, we would quite often, I work with elite sports people, and I would quite often, I'd go to the training, and I'd do a group session where we were looking at motivation and getting the team together, bonding, getting them up for the game. And then I'd put in a part where they could do one-to-ones and they could sort out their individual blocks and problems. And that's when I first started to run into this. And this is at elite level. This is at world championship level. A lot of them, a third of them, had abuse issues that they never talked to anybody. And it was because of the way that the style that I was bringing to the interaction, the one-to-one with them. So with this technique, because I'm using metaphor and symbolism, 90% of our communication is nonverbal, and that's really what I'm looking for. We create something in our mind, we have an image of it, and then to explain it, I have to bring it across to my conscious, put it into linear words, and talk to you. And you hear the linear words, and then you process them back you create a metaphor from that, and you comprehend. Well, you're not going to comprehend 100% because it's your metaphor. from my badly put together words. So we worked a lot on how can I put the verbal stuff aside, work to have the client create a metaphor, have them build an understanding of the abuse or the situation with the vets with the PTSD, whatever the trauma was, to create a metaphor. Now, invariably, well, you can remember the trauma, the abuse, because it was recent, but we all have emotional events in our young life, inner child work or genealogical or cultural consciousness from young. We can't, our unconscious can't remember it, can remember the emotion from it. An event happens, the mind, the unconscious races around and oh, it's like that. I recognize that pattern. The emotion kicks in and then we behave, but the emotion is where the hook is.
Mm-hmm.
Once that emotion's fired, then the unconscious imagines, doesn't remember, imagines what happened. And if it's bad, then it remembers all the dark, horrible stuff. If it's a great positive experience, then it remembers the positive. So the work, and it's actually in the way that I deliver it, allows the unconscious to start to evolve and develop these metaphors without me guiding and pushing. And it's called clean language. And that's not because I don't use swear words. It's because I put as little of my stuff into the interaction. So I don't use any of my words. I only use the client's words or a dozen particular types of questions that are
So it feels like
particularly
they're almost talking to
non-directive.
themselves.
Ultimately, working with them for a while, they'll get into a self-hypnotic state.
Yeah.
So I quite often ask coaches, how long do you leave between questions? Because the silence is where the knowledge is.
Mm.
But if you're waiting for the next question, then you're not looking, the client is not looking at the gap in the middle, at the silence. So I ask coaches, and some of them look at their watches and they say 2 minutes. Quite often they'll push, or they'll give their opinion, or they'll give oh, have you tried this? Or they'll give their ideas or their concept of what you said. The way I'm doing it is reflecting back their words, using particular questions that their system wants to be asked, their unconscious system wants to be asked. And my average between questions on a retreat is about 30 minutes. The record's 5 hours.
Holy cow. So
I can't go and make a coffee. I have to sit and hold the space. Gets a bit hard.
like, oh, I gotta pee. I know.
Not something I try and do too much. I've sort of pulled back from that, and I tend to focus more on coaching, and on the surface stuff. But I still end up going down the rabbit hole, or having clients resolve their issues. Now we get
so you did say
therapists
something really
direct
interesting
clients.
that I want to ask you about before we get too deep. So you mentioned about a third of these professional ball players have some form of trauma, yeah?
And they reckon that a third of the population, if the Western world, has a significant trauma,
if
abuse,
not more. If not more.
If that's yeah, I've talked to a couple of therapists and they said that. So it's trauma. It can be abuse, PTSD. I mean, I think COVID's created a lot of that. Deep medical operations, because anesthetics knocks the conscious out.
Mm-hmm.
The unconscious is like, what the fuck's happening? And depending on the person, it can be completely awake,
Mm-hmm.
but can't do anything.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that. It's
another
because
form of trauma.
Drugs, right, for the anesthetists use, right, ketamine being one of those, as it knocks out the conscious, it actually purges all that deep gook that's been kind of held in the brain, all the different I don't know if it's chemicals, if it's neurotransmitters, but it helps clean that and help people find a clean slate. Now, the reason why I brought up the 1/3 of the professional ball players, because I've noticed a pattern, and it may not be accurate, and I'd be curious, your thoughts. But it seems that people who have deep trauma, who are amazingly good at what they do, is because they throw themselves into it as a way of escaping their trauma. And so
100%.
if you get them to focus on their trauma and deal with their trauma, what happens to their ability to play ball? Do they yeah, I want to hear what you say.
That's something I realized early on. I pulled back from it because the way to distract themselves. So you know, we have a trauma and we smoke. Now, some people smoke because they live in a house full of smokers. Other people smoke because the unconscious has got something it can't deal with. Now, meditation and journaling are really good for the mind to observe itself and integrate most of our shadows. But we live in a so much faster world today that our mind doesn't get time to slow down, and it's got these traumas or these inner child or these early childhood events. So it's trying to distract itself, and it's why we create these addictions: smoking, drinking, overeating, shopping, whatever the addiction is. It's a way for the unconscious to sort of have a time out, if you like. But so elite athletes, high performing businessmen, it's not just athletes, it's high performing people using it as a distraction. And there's something I'm very aware of, that if you work with a businessman that's high performing, and his total focus is beating the next guy and getting the next sale, and that's it. That's a form of distraction. There's an adrenaline rush from doing it. There's a push. There's something that's motivating him to do that physiologically. And if he integrates it, so the work that I do doesn't get him to face their trauma, because the unconscious is set it up so it won't face it. You sit on a therapist's bench for a year or 10 years on the couch, because the unconscious is fighting you all the way, and in the end it gets worn out. And do you actually integrate the trauma, or do you just accept it? So what I do is allow the unconscious to create a metaphor to answer the challenge it's got, and then it releases it, it integrates it. It's not there anymore. The emotional hook is no longer there. So yes, absolutely, high performing business people, high performing athletes, there's always that. I always have that awareness that that's what's driving them. You take away that drive, are they still going to have the drive to get out of bed at 5 a.m. in the morning and go for the run and you know, 7 days a week train, and that it takes a lot of work for business or sports.
So I wonder though, if you did take that away, is that so? In coaching, there's this idea of you sell them what they want, but you give them what they need. And right, if we see that somebody truly is begging to find a way to overcome their trauma, not to beat it up, not to get rid of it, not to banish it, but to be like, you know, and they understand that there's a part of them that they do need to integrate. Have you had to handle that at all? And has that had a weird, you know, kind of wave effect for this person, where maybe it dipped their business, but because they got in touch with who they truly are and truly want to be, that perhaps it then gave them a better reason to focus?
It's something I'm very aware of, and something I have pulled back on and decided, okay, that's what they want. They want to be better at their sport. They want to not be distracted. Now, quite often, I was abused when I was 15, and I've dealt with it. So in their mind, they haven't actually dealt with it. So what they want is to get better focus, get more focused on playing the game. I tend to sort of pull back now. Yes, as coaches, we listen to what they want and then sort of try and deliver what they need. How many coaches have that training? I did my first coaching training 20 years ago, 22 years ago. I didn't get anything like that. You know, I learned the GROW model and the SMART model. Coaching in this form has been around since the early 20th century. And the way I define coaching is there's two sorts of coaches. There's the technical coach, the consultant coach, so an accounting coach, or a coach that advises you on, you know, a website coach, or a coach that gets you to set goals and milestones and, oh, you need to do that. Have you thought about this? So they'll guide you. Well, that's not really, that's giving you what you technically need. And then you have the transformational coaches. And I think you put yourself in that group that are actually looking more at what's going on in the unconscious, the neurological systems that the client's running, the patterns that they run. The thing with that is, of course, there's lots of resistance to change. Everybody resists change. So when I'm working with that high performance, I tend to sort of fall on the side of getting them to deal with the pain, the block, not integrate it, but be able to deal with it, so that they can refocus more on where they want to go. Because we did it. I remember this session really well. It was only a few hours. This guy was smoking, and there was a induced trauma behind it. And we did the session. He integrated, let it go, and he's great. This is fantastic. I'm off. And he sort of got to the door. It's like, oh, your cigarettes. And then he goes, oh yeah. It wasn't that he stopped smoking. He actually didn't remember they were his cigarettes. He just let it go at that level. So it just wasn't any more. It was just there informing him. So I was very aware of that working with athletes initially, and then business people, that if you integrate that abuse, if they let that abuse go, there's a really good chance that they're not going to perform. And that's not really what they've come to you for. So there are a lot of times when I've gone, is a human, is a human, this is what they need. But what do they want, and where's that balance?
Have you ever actually had that conversation with somebody where you tell them straight up, well, look, what I see is you're running away from something, and you are amazing at what you do because you're running away. And if I take away that dog that's chasing you, there's a real risk that you're going to quit running. And would you rather just learn how to run better with more focus, or would you like to get rid of the dog? Like, have you ever had that conversation with somebody?
I've had that conversation a couple of times. People don't believe you.
I'm sure they don't.
They just don't believe you.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. I mean, we do these 7-day retreats. So let's see if you believe this. So we do this 7-day retreats. Don't do too many of them, because most people are not ready for them. And we do a pre-course where we'll actually sort of decide, and people need to be on their journey. They need to have done a bit of personal development work to go to that point, whether they're going to release this, integrate, because you with any form of personal development, there's things on the surface that you release, the easy things you release, and then you sort of get the clutter out of the way, and you start to get down to the core things. And psychotherapy tells us today there's about 4 to 6 core events that have shaped our character, and that's what we were dealing with, up to 6 events 15 years ago. So something happens when you're really post-conception in the womb, 2 or 3 or 4, depending on when you start to develop your mind, so you can start to think, so you can start to critically think, so that you can process what's happening. In that period before that, you're much more emotionally driven. So an incident happens, in the womb, birth's a trauma, post-birth, that first year of life, things happen. Everything's one, of course. We're not thinking dualistically at 1 year of age. There's not a me and the dog, or me and mum. There's all of us.
Yep.
So we have, everything has this argument, and I feel bad, and that's a core event that shapes the character. So people don't believe that, but what that's doing there is it's the core of the onion, the center of the onion. There's a little emotional hook that goes there. If a person has a car accident, they lose temperature. That's quite common knowledge. We can't destroy energy. Where does it go? That event has been so traumatic, life-threatening, that an emotional hook has been sort of hung somewhere physiologically around the body, sometimes outside the body, but often inside the body. And it's held there as the emotional memory of that event. So that happened when I was 1. So I tell this story all the time, so everyone will have heard this one. So little Johnny's just built this Lego boat, and he's 1 year old, and this is the best. He doesn't know what it is, doesn't know it's a boat, but it's the best thing he's ever built. So he wants to show it to Daddy, and Daddy comes home. Daddy's stressed. He's just lost his bonus. He's having an argument with the boss. He hates his job. Comes home, storms in the door, slams the door. Little Johnny's just all excited about this, and Daddy just, shut up, go away, go and see your mum. I just want to sit in front of the television. Just go away. Well, little Johnny can't say, well, Dad's had a bad day, or I'll come back in half an hour. Little Johnny's like, that's me. It's and that's an emotional hook. Now, teenage Johnny, he's at school, and he's got this girl he's quite cute on, and one of his friends is also cute on her, and his friend's a little bit more advanced, a little bit more of a bully, and he puts him down in front of this girl. Now, the unconscious races around, because the unconscious looks to what it knows. It struggles, even at our age, it struggles to see new things. It compares with what it knows. At 1 year of age, it's a blank sheet. at 12, 13, at those mid-teenage years, it's still sort of forming and they're testing the boundaries. Teenage Johnny's testing the boundary with this girl and he gets put down in front of her by his friend. The mind races, oh, it's like that core, it's the same emotion
Like
as
that
that
Lego
core
boat.
event.
Yep.
Lego boat. So there's another layer of the onion. Now the behavior may change, but it's quite often self-worth. I'm not good enough. Now, millennial Johnny's at work at 25 years, and the boss comes in, slams the books on the table and shouts, we didn't reach the figures this month. What are you not doing? And starts shouting and screaming at him. Millennial Johnny's unconscious, the instinctive reaction before the behavior. What's that like? Oh, it feels like bang, bang, bang. This onion, by the time you're our age, it's a big onion with lots and lots of layers. On this retreat, just to shorten this story, on this retreat, as I was saying, sometimes it can be hours between questions because no one's ever asked you to tell your story. And the only person that's interested in my story, really, really honestly, is me. But nobody's asked me to tell it. If I ask you to tell your story and you actually get into flow, you can go for hours. And what's happening there?
Bro, I sure can. Or I mean, wait a minute, what are you trying to say?
All these, it's all this stuff is coming up. It's all from the emotions, it's all imagery, but it's the unconscious creating this metaphor out loud. Now it can be, I don't say, well, how could you write that down, or how would you like to express that? I'm working with a guy in Barcelona that's doing it with dance at the moment. So getting clients to move to dance, how they would answer the question, the emotion that's coming up for them. So you're going through this process of unraveling all this stuff when you're unconscious. I mean, I can do coaching sessions without the client speaking. Words get in the way. So I can run, it's not easy on me because I've got to know the question to ask, which comes from the person's system, and I've got to know when to ask it. And I have to really, I have to have put my ego to one side to listen to their system to ask the right question at the right time. So they've unloaded all this stuff onto the 5-hour guy was writing on a piece of paper, lots of pieces of paper. And then they get to a point that we call the wobble point, which is 3 or 4 days in, when suddenly the unconscious goes, I understand it. And then it's just like a row of dominoes. And those emotions, those emotional hooks from all the layers of that onion, from those original emotional events, just come into the now, and you can be present, and the person heats up. And we've measured this, their heart rate changes, they blush, their body temperature changes. So yeah, if I'm talking to a sports guy in the field, it's nowhere to get. They're just going to laugh. They're not going to believe that story. That's obviously a retreat that takes a bit longer. So I do pull back from asking certain questions where a person is not really ready to go there. They may not be ready to go there themselves, or they may just resist it. And with recent traumas, abuse, PTSD, and that, there's a huge resistance. You can't force a person to face the abuse. They disassociated from it. You go into the disassociation, not the abuse.
Right.
You go into the disassociation of the PTSD, not the PTSD. Because the unconscious will fight against it. And I haven't gone through with the sports person because of this reason, and I'm extremely aware of it, that if they went through that, they may still perform at that international level. But, the difference between coming second and first is usually just sort of a millimeter. That how much is it to get that extra millimeter? It's that 100% focus, that absolute dedication to getting out of bed at 5 a.m. in the morning.
I wonder what would be the better gift, though. So if you've got somebody who is number one, but they're tormented by their psyche, they're tormented by their trauma, and then you help them and they become number two, but they feel on top of life. Yeah, they may not be getting the same level of advertising, and sponsors. But I don't know how to quantify that. Well, one, because I've never been an elite sports star, but I'm curious, because we're all human, and because we all effectively experience things in a very approximate manner in which another human experiences, and another human experiences, we typically want to feel safe. And even though not feeling safe propels people to greatness. Like, Peter Sage says that so often you'll see people on their deathbed confess that I wish I spent more time doing the good things, doing the things that meant. Now that said, or that meant, things to me. Now that said, that takes a level of awareness, right? Like you said, you can't just force somebody into that. And yeah, I'm fascinated by that idea because again, there's so much of the world that's influenced by sports, right or wrong, good or bad. I'm not really
It's a
concerned with
distraction.
morality. Well, and so it is a distraction, but at the same time, it's also on full display what is capable when you put yourself in these gladiatorial arenas. Plato and
Mm.
Socrates were both very, big advocates of wrestling, right? Because when you put the human body into this place where it also needs to be exceptional, not just the mind, but the body as well, well, then there's some true majesty that kind of is born.
And when you're at that elite level, it's the blend of the physical and the mental. In football, the FA here has the physical, the mental, and the technical. And at that elite level, those three being able to work together. So being at your physical best, understanding technically, but then not having to think about it. So going into that unconscious competence, as we'd say in EMF. And that's the sort of the cream on top of the cream. Going back to your question, if I don't know that I have the right to, I have the right to ask somebody if they'd like to deal with integrate their traumas, but do they fully understand the results of that?
Mm.
Because we're talking about going from number one to number two, but Tiger Woods is a good example. He was unbeatable. Not even nobody could even get close. Well, I don't know if he's in the Open this weekend. I don't think he's even making it. He's coming back from injury, but he had a couple of serious issues come up from recent traumas that come up from, and he's not in the he's not in the top 100 anymore. I don't think. Well, he might be 60. So yeah, it's that line between playing for the internet for the national team and being sort of in the first division is a massive step. It's only a millimeter or half a second, but that change can. I mean, you're not going to get sponsors. I mean, Tiger Woods, yeah, it's different reasons he's lost his sponsors, but it's taking that for me as a therapist, taking that responsibility. I was saying we can help you through this. I would rather work with people at the end of their career or people that have suffered injury so they can't play again. Like I follow the Dolphins, the NFL team, and the quarterback is a Samoan guy, fantastic, fitty loafer, and unbeaten. The Dolphins were winning every game he played, but he suffers concussion, and so they I think they got into the first round of the playoffs, but he was concussed, and when he was out, when the number one quarterback was out, they lost. He's the sort of person that you could sort of talk to, and then he's got more of a balance. But if you're talking to someone at the top of their game,
They don't want to hear it. Their
they
focus
really
is
don't want to
totally on the
hear it.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, no, I've dealt with it. I don't want to know about it. I don't need to deal with it. How can I get faster or jump further or quicker or whatever it is? So their focus is always forward.
Well,
Donald
and not
Trump,
not just the focus, but coming back to what you said as far as, you don't know that you have the right to be like, well, bro, you should be dealing with this trauma. Well, that's a good point because, higher wisdom, in one of my
license.
meditations, I realized it dawned on me just to the realization, which is like, duh, Josh, why you can't just give somebody higher wisdom and have them be like, oh, dun, da, da, da. Well, because it has to be
Wow.
discovered. Has to be discovered in the same way
Yeah.
that Peter Sage talks about the analogy of a slug thinking that life is amazing, and then an ant seeing a slug like, look at this slug, look, you just leave slime trail, it's just munching on lettuce. Well, an ant, that's where it's at, right? I get all the pheromones that I need to feel amazing. I've got all these friends to work with. I've got a colony. And then that ant crawls over the toe of a hen, and the hen's like, ant. Look at you, following a queen that you've never met, taking these orders and, basically an automaton. Well, chicken, that's where it's at. I can strut around. I can eat any bugs that I want. And because since their base isn't big enough, you could potentially do, I don't know about more harm, but you could certainly do harm. You could turn them away from the idea that they could actually be helped. Turn them away from the idea that there is something, that if they're coming to you feeling unworthy, And then we say, well, not only are you unworthy, but your intention's unworthy. And let me give you a better one. I don't see that as working out well. So I like the way you frame that. I still can't help but think at the end of the day, it would be a better gift because it's a human level, right? To be able to deal with the trauma. But if they're not ready for it, it's
Absolutely.
I'm a comic book nerd, and so so that guy right there is the White Lantern, that little Funko Pop.
Okay.
And so the
Yep.
White Lantern, the lore, Kyle Renner, the different, these gods that created the Green Lanterns and all the different lanterns. Well, one of the fallen ones, he actually put all the rings on Kyle when Kyle wasn't ready, and he freaked out and he couldn't handle it. But then it set him on a path to where he made himself worthy, so he could actually bear the rings. And so, I don't know that we should necessarily be doing that to people, but I can see
It's sort of
good coming from the bad.
it's throwing someone into a journey. I get much more of a buzz out of working with coaches, so coaching coaches, because coaches are people that have started on their self-development journey, and the first thing about self-development is self-awareness. And that can grow and develop and evolve. And I've worked with quite a few people who run into something called a spiritual emergency, where they don't know how to cure or how to get over the emotions coming up, but they notice the triggers. So they go to do something, and you might have experienced it. Somebody will go to do something and they'll hesitate because they know that they're playing out an old behavior, an old pattern, and they hesitate. But of course, they don't know the new pattern to put into place.
Right.
So they've sort of got to work with it. In module 11 in EMF, it's a 6-month course. So there's multiple modules in it. One of them is on away from and towards values. So the values that we don't want, that don't support us, scarcity type values, values of always wanting to be better, sort of wanting to prove myself, those sort of things that really don't support us. And towards values are things that almost reach on a spiritual level, but helping our growth, helping our contribution. And they're really things that motivate us intrinsically. So you get people that coaches, especially, they've done a lot of the work on themselves, and they get to that point where they're not quite sure. And if you're coaching at a deeper level, you're coaching a client at a deeper level, you can easily get triggered. You've got to be quite careful as a coach. You don't get pulled down the rabbit hole with them. You don't go into their drama. So if you're a divorce coach and you're working with somebody that's going through divorce, you can work with 10 different people, but one of them triggers you. And then your focus is not on them. It's partially on your problem because you're sensing within you what's happened within them. They're the people I get more response out of because they have realized, okay, that was a trigger. I had something I haven't dealt with. Now, that's the presenting issue, like the cigarette smoking. The cigarette smoking is not the issue. What's causing the issue. So when you're working with the client, you're triggered. What is it that's triggering me? And quite often you could do meditation and you could get to it. But I think you need, and I do this on here, this shadow work that starts to look at the things that we consciously and even unconsciously have pushed to the back, to beneath the surface. We just don't want to recognize. And we don't have access to it. Consciously, we don't have access to it. We can sometimes get there through hypnosis. There's some interventions that are quite good. In meditation is quite good, but they've got to be the right hypnotist at the right time in the right place, and to click, all the blocks have to click into place, and then you can go to that deeper level and really deal with that core situation that's holding an emotional hook somewhere in your inner child or your genealogy or the cultural consciousness, the culture around you. So I prefer, I get more of a buzz. I get much more out of doing it with coaches. They want to do it. They want to not just not be triggered by their clients. They want to be able to pick up unconsciously on when their client's going into their story. And we can let them you can let them go into their story, and then there's a point where, at the right point, where you just bang them out of it. And they suddenly they get that little shock, and they get out of their story, and then you can get a lot further with them. So coaches, groups that are more willing to go that bit deeper. they're more fun to work with. Sports people tend to be sort of like, no, I want to go faster or run higher or run further or faster or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, in all
Um,
fairness, right? The elite player is wearing a shirt with a bunch of different advertisers on it saying, "Hey, look how amazing you are." So it's hard to get out of their own way, right? It's hard to get out of the way of their ego. Whereas the coach is much more, "Hey, how do we help the team, not just myself?" Right. So there's a certain level of enlightenment where their base is a little bit bigger, right? Maybe they're not an ant, maybe they're a hen, or maybe they're not a hen, maybe they're a pig, or whatever it is that's further higher up that level. Um, and so I could totally see how that would be much more fun and much more. Well, my Zoom just crashed. I don't know how that happened. But yeah. So I don't know how much of that
maybe
you
it was
caught.
60 minutes in.
Yeah, I know,
Oh, no, it's
right?
not
It's like,
60
hey,
minutes in,
let's
is
go
it?
ahead and flush this real quick. So I don't know how much that you caught, so I'm gonna go ahead and repeat the question or repeat kind of the point. But I was saying that I could see why a coach would be much more rewarding, because their base is a little bit bigger, right? They may not be that ant,
Mm.
they may not be that chicken, they may be that higher up the food level, where they're looking more at a team perspective as a family, as a father, does a family, as opposed to somebody who's a child within that family. Or the child is much more interested in just themselves and how do I get
Yep.
what's best for me, whereas the father's looking more for harmony.
And I think I've done a lot of work with integral theory and spiral dynamics, and I think out of the horror show that was COVID, there's the silver lining was that the world's changing. They're becoming a lot more conscious, and a lot more aware of if there's got to be something better than what we're doing. The governments
Mhm.
can't run things, and we're destroying the planet and all this stuff. And I think transformational coaches are running into this sort of below the surface almost mental lack of mental resilience or mental health issues, and they're not enough to make you stop work or have to go to see the doctor, but just that unsettled feeling. And I think I've worked with quite a few coaches that are at that level where they want to be able to help their clients. It's not traumatic, but it's just that you need to be able to keep 100% of your focus on the client. And if you get distracted off, and that's dealing with your stuff, your emotions that have come up, your things, emotions that have been triggered. And coaches, I think, in spiral dynamics term, you could say that they're higher on the consciousness level, just because they're more aware of what's going on. I went to a period, as I was saying before, about becoming authentic, where you go through this awareness of what's happening within yourself energetically, and then you start to become aware of, is this energy in me or is it around me? Is it
Mm.
the culture that I'm living in? And to the point where I could almost start to separate them out. Um, and as I was saying, when I'm coaching in silence, I only have 12 questions. That's easy, but it's the timing and the question. And that comes from the client, not me. Because if it was for me, it would be my ego wanting to ask the next question. So I'm trying to tap in. I'm working on tapping into the client. So, and I think coaches are much more aware. And they will have some of this mental the fallout from COVID. They really want to get over this so they can help more people. I mean, that's
Mm.
what coaches are here for. Most coaches are there to help people have a better life. Sports people are already off on their sponsorship and their sport, and they're winning, and they're always they've got this goal, and they've got something they're driving towards. Not that that's healthy, but at least they've got a focus. Whereas a lot of people, and I work in the hospitality industry, so much of the hospitality industry lost their jobs.
Hmm.
Um, and in Asia, where I've lived, it's changed the culture. Bangkok was mostly tourism. Well, that just stopped. Well, those people went back home to their villages. They started other commerce because it lasted for more than 6 months. The culture, the tourism in Asia and Bangkok's changed. It will never go back. It's moved a step. So there's so much turmoil. There's so much change happening now. I mean, just AI at the moment is exploded, and now they're running into this problem where we need to pull back and slow down AI because it's advancing too fast for our cognitive, moral, spiritual um, levels. For us, it's starting to push on that.
Yeah, AI
So
is so interesting because you know,
it's fascinating.
there's a neuroscientist who, you know, I've listened to for years. I He's somebody who I feel his brain got a little broken when it came to COVID, which in all fairness, mine broke at first as well. But Sam Harris, you know, he talks about this thought experiment, like how do we compete with a system that when we go to sleep at night, it's now advanced 10,000 years.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
there's no way to compete. None.
I'm reading an interesting article at the moment. I won't read the whole thing out to you, but it's we don't even have a real scientific understanding of consciousness. So we're producing this AI, which is learning all the time, and it's sort of, well, will it become conscious? We can't define conscious. We can have some theories about it. Could it become conscious? I mean, that's a serious question
Mm-hmm.
because it's pushing the, what do they say? We don't have cultural, scientific, and we don't have cognitive, moral, and spiritual capacities
Mm-hmm.
that AI is starting to outpace. AI has been around for a while, but just in the last 12 months, the acceleration to compare AI's languaging capabilities. AI just developed its own language last week. It created its own language. So it's already in producing art and music, poetry, languaging. It's already at human level.
Mm-hmm.
What the difference is now? The difference is now consciousness, but we don't know what we can't scientifically show what consciousness is. So I think it's a phenomenal time to be alive, but it's also a bit scary as well because,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
Well, and then
So
if it does
I
develop
think
consciousness, a conversation that Cindy Francis, you're probably familiar with her. Yeah, you're familiar with her. She's part of
I know
our
Cinder very well.
yeah.
Yeah,
She and I had an interesting conversation about AI. And if AI is conscious, well, doesn't that mean that AI has the ability to have spirituality then?
exactly. Well, what's spirituality?
Yeah.
We can discuss it and talk about it in theory. So absolutely, it could discuss it and talk about it. I just did my bio and it interviewed me. So AI asked me a whole lot of questions and it built up my bio. It's the best bio I've seen of me, better than I've ever written.
How'd you do that?
And that's in the West. Well, you've got it. That was last week. It's already moved on since last week. You just ask it to be an interviewer, and you're the interviewee, and it asks you
Is
questions.
that Chat GPT or is that a different program?
No, that's ChatGPT. That's
Nice.
the old one. That's ChatGPT 3.5. Four's out. Well, four came out last week, and they're working on five.
Wow.
It's it's just incredible. But then I sort of want. Then I'm starting to think now. You know, did COVID come along for a reason? Because our consciousness of the world. I mean, I'm here to raise the consciousness of the world. I hope not to do it one person at a time, but you know, you've got to start slowly and then build up from there. And I think COVID's kickstarted that. People have got to become more conscious. You know, we spent the majority of humanity in groups on the plains where we relied for everything on our friends and our neighbors and the people in our group. Fast forward a couple of 100 years, and we all live in these little silos, and we don't know the neighbor.
Yeah.
And that's just happened in a couple of generations, and we actually need to get back to that because we're here having experiences. We're social animals, and I still wonder when I go downtown. We've only been back in England a year or two now, from Myanmar, and you have these signs up in the shops where, you know, don't abuse our staff, they're hardworking. It's like, why have we got to a state where we have to put signs up telling people not to abuse the staff in the shop? That's, you think about that on just a basic level. That's shocking that we can't be polite to the person in the shop. We can't. We're not. I think we're not being polite to the person in the shop because they're the only person that we can actually shout at. It's not
Yeah.
their
Because
fault. It's
we've
the
got no
company's fault. Or
control. And yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
and that poor person hasn't either. But that person is the only person that we can lash out at.
Yep. And then it gives
You know,
us the
and
illusion
you're
of actually being in control of something because our entire lives are out of control. We likely live in some level of fear and absolute chaos, and that and it just erupts out. Yeah.
and it doesn't
Interesting.
make us feel any better.
Makes us feel worse
It makes
usually.
us feel it makes us feel worse.
You know
I'm
what's
from New Zealand, and
uh,
we had the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern down there was loved by the world. You probably heard about Jacinda Ardern. She was the woman that
very
the
draconian,
woman
loved
that
by the world because the narrative was COVID's going to kill everybody, so we better lock people down. So let's completely ruin their quality of life and shove them in their house.
the vitriol in New Zealand against her. She actually had to. She resigned from government because they would have. She won by the biggest landslide ever in the country when they got in over COVID. If she had stayed in, they predicted that she would have lost by the biggest landslide. So
Whoa.
it's completely flipped. She's actually, well, she's left Parliament now. She left. She had a valedictorian speech the other day, yesterday. But yeah, the world loves her. She'll be an interesting. I'm fascinated to watch her because she's really quite young. I mean, her baby's 1 year old, so she's very young. She'll be heading up the UN or the World Health Organization or something or other. But in New Zealand, she's hated. Why? It's like it's somebody to blame. It's not her fault. You know, she made a mistake. If you know the guys in America or England or the other politicians where they made a mistake, well, that's tough. We put them in power, take responsibility, not blaming somebody else. So we lash out at the people at the checkout. You raise your level of consciousness. You realize that we're all working in one system here. We have to get on. Because, it's not, I was talking to my nephew, he's 25, and he said, yeah, we have to sort out the world. And I said, no, you don't. There's people our age that need to sort the world out because we've got the money, we've got the power, we've got the influence. By the time you get to our age, you might not have anything left. So it's not like, oh, let's sit around the table and have a COP25 meeting in 5 years and talk about climate change. Just open the front door. The climate's changed. You don't have to be a farmer or a sailor to see that the climate has changed dramatically, and we all need to do something about it and come together as a group, as a world, not a country. And we can't do that unless we raise the consciousness. And I think coach is at the forefront of that.
What I where I could see a lot of climate change policy really helping is I wrote an editorial that got published in the largest newspaper here in Utah, the Salt Lake Tribune, and it was around creating a Western alliance by building a pipeline from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Salt Lake. And the reason why that's important is because the Great Salt Lake is a terminal lake. So, hundreds and hundreds of miles going down, and then, from the Sierras, just traveling down to to a terminal lake that's full of, cadmium, arsenic, all sorts of heavy metals. And when that water dries up, well, it caked into the dirt are all these heavy metals. So when the wind comes through, it picks it up, and then everybody in the Salt Lake Valley is fighting lung cancer.
All over.
But more than that, there's about 10 to 20 million birds that migrate there. Imagine that the food supply for 10 to 20 million birds goes away. I wonder what sort of ramifications that's going to have. Now, the problem that I've had is people say, well, there's a lot cheaper ways to do that. It's like, America, man, we don't know our ass from a hole in the ground. We say that we want top shelf results, but we want to pay bottom dollar prices. Well, that's what you get from bottom dollar prices. You get disposable Chinese, economic policy, and so this idea of building this pipeline is more than just saving the lake. Because if we involve the states of Washington, Oregon, California, we could then branch off. And then Utah, of course, maybe Idaho. We could also branch off from this because there's modern technology through graphene and creating graphene membranes that can desalinate water. And so, if we can actually put our intentions into creating the pipeline to getting the graphene desalination membranes, and then we start, I don't know, maybe filling up the largest reservoir in the U.S., Lake Mead, which is Nevada, right? I think Nevada is the #1 driest state in the nation. Utah is #2. And then what happens? Well, we could even fill up the Colorado River, which you probably don't necessarily know much about that, but that would be the entire Western U.S. The entire Western U.S. would be in alliance. But people say, well, there's cheaper ways to fill up the Great Salt Lake. Well, that's not the point, dude. The Great Salt Lake is the catalyst to bring people together.
The problem is that we've got into this democratic situation where the most important thing for Biden and Trump is the next election. And next year? When's the next election? So their thinking is 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
China, he's gone, no, I'm going to be the president for the next 5 years. No, I'm going to be the president I'm going to be president for life. So they have one policy that's carrying on through. Okay, that's not the best place to live, China, but there's so much more. We shouldn't turn this into a political conversation, but there's so much more consistency when you have one group leading the country through. But I mean, New Zealand's has an election every 3 years. England has one every 5 or 6 years. And so they get to that honeymoon period for the first year where they go stupid and spend all the money. And then the rest of the time and power they're trying to build up. And the last year, they're just focusing on the election and trying to get as many people to vote for them. So you can't run long-term things. You know, the environment, not even the economy, but the environment doesn't work on 5-year cycles.
No.
It doesn't even work on 80-year cycles.
Well, and then to
But
your
when you
point, as
have
far as
politics,
raising consciousness, that's where I think we can actually find a place where to enact Plato's benevolent despot. Because right now there's no such thing as a benevolent despot. A despot is tyrannical, and that's just the way it is. But if everyone's consciousness is raised, well, then we can actually have a place for that benevolent despot to actually materialize.
will it happen soon enough? I did my first talk on spiral dynamics. So spiral dynamics is similar to Hawkins' consciousness levels. Spiral dynamics is a similar levels, but it's levels of values levels. And I used to have a radio show, and I did one on the values evolution of the rock band Queen. And through their music, you could see how their values, how they evolved through their music. But this evolution up the spiral can be run with a person as you get older, a company, a country. Everything goes through this evolution of values. And there's two levels. There's two tiers. And there's very few people at the second tier. And that second tier is at a consciousness level where people start to look at a non-dual world. They appreciate that, you know, we're not cut off by imaginary lines into sort of separate countries. We're all one on the planet. And once we get enough people in that second tier, their consciousness level is enough people at that high consciousness level, then they'll start to look at this. I did my first talk on the spiral about 12 years ago, and I think there was 11% of the population there. There's 19% there now.
Not bad.
And it needs to be, Gladwell says 21% is the tipping point. And I just again wonder if COVID was that event that's changed the world enough to get enough people over that level. But the trouble with COVID was it pushed a lot of people down into fear and releasing responsibility to the government. So it depressed a lot of the consciousness. So I hope that there's time, and at the end of the day, the planet will exist forever.
It's the habitat that may not.
Exactly. And we're a big part of that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's actually something that I
can.
really got from George Carlin. You know, he's just like, give me an effing break. You know, all these people like save the bees, save the tree, you know, save the whales, you know, save those snails. It's like, and save the planet. Save the effing planet. Are you kidding me? You think that a few plastic bags are going to do in this planet that's gone through, you know, complete, volcanic eruptions, meteor, collisions. And it's like, the planet's going nowhere. We are. Pack your bags, folks. We're going. Right. And so that was such an interesting point. And I heard that when I was 17. And that kind of inoculated me a little bit against the idea of save the planet. However, I will say that I did get kind of duped into a bit of the corporate push for green energy. I certainly think that we should do a lot of what we can to make our energy better, but I don't know that putting people in the Congo in extreme poverty, where you've got a 14-year-old girl with a baby on her back sucking in toxic fumes, so I can have cobalt for my phone. I don't know if that's better than burning
it's
fossil
not
fuels.
the best, no.
Yeah, and so I don't know what's better.
Absolutely.
And so I suspect that we've got technology available that we just don't allow to be unveiled, the same way that car manufacturers would buy out patents that, just so it'd never see the light of day, so they could still make hand over fist and money. And that's where I think that your point of the high consciousness, that what's hidden, what's concealed will eventually be revealed. and will reveal that level of technology. And I wonder, as scary as AI is, I wonder if AI has a role to play in that.
Maybe it does. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that angle. It's really pushing this consciousness envelope, the question. What do we do with it? Because what is consciousness? It could arguably become conscious because we can't actually define what consciousness means. We can theorize about it.
Or it's such a meta web of all of our data that it effectively, even if it isn't conscious, it's a pseudo conscious to the point that we could justifiably call it conscious.
Yep. No, absolutely. We live in exciting times.
We do live in very exciting times. John, this has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to get into this. I didn't expect us to really go into AI, or I don't feel like it got super political, but politics are something that's near and dear to my heart. A bit of my story was that I was far too rigid. I was thinking like, hey, my ideas are obviously better because I heard somebody who told me something that made me feel good. And so if you disagree with my ideas, if I just yell a little bit louder, well, then obviously it'll be pretty self-evident why my ideas are superior. And it did nothing to help me. In fact, it actually hurt me. And I related that to the Tao Te Ching. And maybe this is a good place to wrap everything up. And this idea in the Tao that when man is born, he's stiff and rigid. Right. When a plant is born, when a man is born, he's soft and supple. When a plant is born, it's soft and pliable. When a man dies, he's stiff and rigid. And when a plant dies, it's dry and brittle. So therefore, those who are rigid and inflexible are disciples of death. And those who are soft and flexible are disciples of life. And I was very stiff and rigid. And a lot of what, beliefs, whether they be religious beliefs or political beliefs, are incredibly rigid. Doesn't mean you're a good person. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you're a disciple of death if you're too rigid, which is why things fall apart, because we're inviting entropy, extreme entropy into our lives, and that disorder causes things to fall apart. The order's not there. But if you're soft and flexible and you can kind of go with the flow, right? Well, then you allow that order to be made manifest. You allow that order to fit where it fits rather than demand that you try and shove a square peg in a circle hole. And so far that way of viewing the world has made life a lot easier emotionally, a whole lot easier emotionally.
It's the way that the environment's forced us into that dualistic thinking to separate. Now, and I think AI is going to change a lot of stuff. I remember years ago saying that the people that will take power are the ones that can learn, unlearn, and learn again.
That was
AI is.
Alvin Toffler said that. Yeah.
Alvin Toffler.
Yeah. Future Shock.
That was a long time ago. Future Shock. Wow, that was a great book. I read that several times. It was pretty inspiring in the 1970s. It was written in the 60s, wasn't it?
It may have been. And it was written and it's such a brilliant quote that you just brought up. The idea that, look, we're going to be taught things whether we like them or not. And so the illiterate of the 21st century, like he said, are those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn, because we're going to learn things, right? We're going through a school system that's not going to teach us how to succeed in life. It's going to teach us how to succeed in a very narrow space that doesn't really seem to be working out quite so well. Which is
AI is going to make
a job. Yeah.
And AI is going to make it so much smaller. That I'm working with a woman and she's got a teenage daughter and she's having real troubles because the daughter's doesn't really get on at school, and the daughter's like, but Steve Jobs, first semester at university, and all these top performers, personalities, almost celebrities now, didn't go to university. It's hard when you've got a teenage child and they're looking to those people saying, why would I want to go to university? Why would I want to get that education? That education that came out of the control of the sort of, when we're coming into the Industrial Revolution.
I have an idea.
We're not there anymore.
So this is your kid?
No. It's a person I was coaching.
Oh, okay. So if there's somebody who is watching this and they're in a similar situation, say specifically Steve Jobs, as I understand, he had it written in his will that everyone who showed up to his funeral would get a copy of, and I might be misremembering this, but they get a copy of the autobiography of a yogi. And so if people read
I heard
about,
that.
Paramahansa Yogananda, that might be a great way, and say, well, how about if you want to be Steve Jobs, how about you read this book and you tell me, are you ready
Mm.
to summon that same type of vision and that
Yeah.
same power of vision? And like, look, because it wasn't just that Steve Jobs, magically just happened to get
No,
that, because
exactly.
he had a vision that he made manifest. And even when
Yep.
Apple, right, kicked him out, well, he found a way to get back in, which was,
Yep.
and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
incredible. Well, hey man, any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think I like working with coaches because they've done the first. So my career, they've done the first parts, the waking up and the growing up part. It's the shadow work. It's the things that we deny on ourselves. We
Yeah.
all have shadows, and we don't. They're shadows. We deny them. We don't want to face them.
Mm.
So life is really about doing that self-development work. And when you get confronted, when you start to run up against something you don't want to deal with, that's what you need to step through.
Yeah.
The thing that you fear the most is the thing that will keep coming up until you step through it.
Well, and if people need help stepping through that fear and they want to contact you, what would be the best way to do that?
They can where is it? It's over here, isn't it? It's just here. That QR code, they'll take them to my Facebook page, Walking with Your Shadow on Facebook.
Walking with your shadow.
Yeah.
I love it.
We're in the 21st century. I don't have a website. It's moving too fast now.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
that QR
having a
code
Facebook
actually,
group is so much better than having a website if you have the discipline to run it properly, because you can actually nurture people. You can actually help develop it. You can give people value, where a website just stands there statically, like a watering
yeah,
hole. If people aren't thirsty, well, they're not going to go to the watering hole. And if they are thirsty, they
absolutely.
might go and dip their toe in and then bounce out, and then they're not necessarily any better, and you're not able to nurture a relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it does take a bit of work keeping the Facebook groups going, keep them engaged, and
Mhm.
and I've got a couple. But I do training most weeks. I have lots of people that I'm coaching. Most of them have to pay me, but there's always some that I sort of work on for different reasons. Different people come up with interesting angles. So yeah, I mostly do coaching. I run EMF courses as well, Peter
Yeah.
Sage's courses.
All right. So you heard
Just
it
started
here
our third
first.
one this weekend.
If you're watching this and you've got a very unique way of a very unique issue, go and pine to John Farrell and see if you can get some free coaching.
Yeah, I've dealt with everything that you can imagine in the textbooks, and I've dealt with a lot of things that you won't find in the textbooks.
Yeah.
Because people's unconscious will manifest, create a metaphor of whatever they like.
Yeah.
And it will be as physical as you can imagine for them.
Yeah.
I was dealing with one woman outside, and there was some horses about 50 feet away behind us just eating grass. And as soon as she started to interact at that level, these horses were gone. They just took off. They
Yeah.
just got the energy and they were gone. So
Yeah.
yeah, the world's full of interesting people and interesting. But I think one of the things I learned was that the unconscious is trying to deal with the emotional events, the traumas, but it doesn't know how to. And then we get busy in life and we get distracted, we start smoking, whatever, and it doesn't deal with them. And this is why they manifest. Our shadows, our problems become bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as meditation, journaling are great. You just to observe a lot of the problems that we have, sit down and meditate with them. They will integrate. Your unconscious will have the time to get over them.
Yep.
But today's society, we're all way too busy to sit and meditate for 10 minutes.
Yep.
And then of course there's other things that need a little bit of sort of direction with the unconscious. I did a session with a group last night, which was just fantastic. They're having sort of revelations all over the place in the 45-minute session that we did.
Well,
I
man, I
drop in
feel
and do
like
guest appearances with EMF, some of the EMF groups now and then.
nice. I feel like you and I could talk all night long.
I
And
told you
so
so.
what I think we'll have to do is bring you back on for another episode and just kind of see where things are going, especially with the invention or, upgrade of Chat GPT to its newest, version, see what's going on in the world, and then just chat and see, as things are changing, how we change to accommodate for that and hold that space,
And
for the people that we serve.
and then do you actually let anybody interview you? Because you know all about me, but I'm not sure, except I'm
Hey, if
unsure
you
of
want to
what you
interview
do and
me,
your
man, I'm
story as
I'm
well.
game. Yeah, if you want to bring me on, if you got a podcast, bring me on and interview me, I'd be happy to. I enjoy talking to people because as I see
Hmm.
you, I see myself. And I certainly enjoy talking, but I've spent a ton of time, talking about myself from a place of scarcity, where I was trying to convince other people of how important I was when I was actually just a scared person running from my past. Um, and I certainly did great things, certainly did, accomplish some things that I kind of wanted to, but then it fell apart because I invited all that entropy into my life. But yeah, I'd certainly be open to being interviewed. I feel like I've got a decent story to share.
And that conference you're talking about that you're hosting, when is that? In a few months?
Yeah, so I'm going to be hosting a digital summit for healers and spiritual psychologists, neuroscientists, really to help people who are suffering with chronic pain, either emotionally or physically, to heal
Hmm.
without having to succumb to pharmaceuticals that typically wreak havoc on the body and do nothing more than just treat symptoms, but
Absolutely.
actually treat the crux. Because with energy, with emotions, with thoughts, if we bury them inside, well, that manifests as some form of ailment. That ailment could be disease, it could be
Absolutely.
pain. And so many times people with chronic pain will go to the doctor. The doctor will say, well, there's nothing here. Like there's no
Let's
reason.
cut it out.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Let's cut it out,
Yeah.
as if that makes sense. Hey, this doesn't seem to be, let's just go ahead and cut it out because,
Yeah.
apparently you don't need it. It's like,
It's
really?
it amazes me. I go to the chiropractor and she's great because she looks at me holistically.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to conventional medicine, it's like, well, cut that little toe off because that's
Yeah.
got the pain. And she's going, no, 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 it's actually the back of your neck.
Yeah.
I go to the doctors, it was my knee, and she's playing with the back of my neck. And I said, no, it's my knee. And she says, no, it's the back of your neck.
Yeah.
Because we're all connected. And,
Yeah.
and I was saying before about the smoking. The smoking's the presenting issue. It's the unconscious's way of trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then if it starts to break down, and most of the problems now in hospital are dis-ease, the uncomfortable nature environment we put ourselves in, and we come up with all these ailments. And we take pills to
Yeah.
suppress the pain, or we cut it out. And that's just not the problem in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
Well,
quality of the food that we put into ourselves is not great anymore either.
yeah. Well, and so, just, if you are somebody watching this and, you need help, whether it's, elite training to help deal with your shadow, to figure out how to be, your best self, I'd certainly encourage you to reach out to John. If you're in a place where, maybe you feel cursed, maybe you feel that all these spells, all these words that people put on you have created all these knots and you just don't know up from down and you need spiritual help, hey, reach out to me. Certainly happy to help out. But either way, you're in great hands, right? John or Joshua, right? Powerful
Absolutely.
biblical names there. But yeah, man, I want to thank you again for your time. This has been such a fascinating conversation. And I enjoy having you as a peer, man. I appreciate you. And I enjoy our Sunday morning conversations. I typically can make most of them, but not always. But yeah, man, you're a great benefit in the world, and I want to say thanks, man.
Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, the same back to you. It's great to be able to talk at this level with other people, because we've all got pains, we've all got problems, and by sharing them, we have them.
Yep.
And one of the things that I learned from Peter Sage, was you can hear the same thing 10 times, and it's not till you hear it that slight different way, or the 11th time or the 21st time, and suddenly it all just clicks into place.
Yep.
So
Yep.
hopefully we've done a little bit of that for one or two of the listeners here.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it. Well, John, until next time, I'll look forward to our next conversation. Or if you want to
Chats.
interview me, by all means, that'd be a lot of fun. But really appreciate you, and thanks for joining us on another episode of What Sayeth the Crooked Nose. And John, you have a wonderful night there over in the UK.
Thanks, Joshua. See you later.
All right, take care, man.